deposition, the one from April 19th, 2018. Judge, we have prepared transcripts for each jury member to have through the course of the proceedings. We've talked with counsel. Pages 5, 6, and 7 have been omitted from the transcripts that the jury members will have because that was a colloquy with counsel only. That was not on video. That was relative to some proprietary information of the doctor and discussion among counsel for that. So that, by agreement, has been omitted from the transcript that will be provided. Judge, we would also suggest that it would be appropriate that the jury be told that they will be hearing objections during the course of the playing of the videotape from both the state and the defense. But we both feel, and I believe that the state agrees, that they should be advised that either the objections have been withdrawn by the respective parties or overruled by the court, and therefore they can disregard the objections.
Okay. I appreciate that. Anything from the state on that?
Just that I agree with that, and it also applies to our next two depositions that will be played in rebuttal of Drs. Bolter and Dr. Wright.
Okay.
The one final note that I just wanted to make, just so that the record is clear, the transcript that was provided to the jury yesterday was redacted pursuant to the stipulation regarding Dr. Wu's deposition, which was filed with the court on January 31st of this year. So that transcript was accordingly redacted. Just so the record's clear, I just wanted to note that.
I appreciate that. Okay. All right. Thank you. Anything else, Tim, before we bring the jury in? Are we okay? All right. Thank you all very much. We'll bring the jury in. Thank you for your cooperation. Christopher?
Yes, sir.
Please be seated, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning again to all of you. You look good today. You look like you're ready to roll today, so I appreciate that. Actually, we may be a little shorter today, so it may work out a little bit better for you today. So appreciate your attention. We're going to proceed then with the next witness. The next witness was indicated by counsel, I believe, earlier, Dr. Wu, Part 2, if you will. Again, you're going to hear that by way of video deposition by agreement of the parties. Each of you will be provided with a written transcript of the testimony to assist you. Should you find any discrepancy between what you thought you heard versus what you see in writing, the audio controls, and you will decide based on the audio. Also, ladies and gentlemen, in this particular one, you may hear objections, okay? All of the objections have either been withdrawn by counsel or overruled or taken care of legally by myself. So during the course of the objections, just listen to them. Well, not even really listen to them, but just kind of disregard them, listen to the question and the answer, and go from there. Everybody okay with that? Last thing I forgot to ask, any problems last night? Everybody okay? Everything good? Okay, thank you all very much. All right, with that, we're ready to proceed.
While the transcripts are being passed out, I would ask permission that during a certain portion of the playing of the transcript that I could approach, display some boards, exhibit boards as appropriate, just like this.
Absolutely, no problem. All set? Right. A little tough to read, I understand that, but just do the best you can.
Good afternoon. This is the videotape deposition of Dr. Joseph Wu, taken at 1200 Quayle Street, Suite 140, Newport Beach, California, 92660, on April 19th, 2018, in the matter of the State of Ohio versus Anthony Kirkland. Case number is B0901629. This case is being heard in the Common Pleas Court of the State of Ohio and for the County of Hamilton. This deposition is on behalf of the plaintiff. My name is Renee Mayfield with Dean Jones Legal Videos, Inc. of Los Angeles and Santa Ana, California. This deposition is commencing at 1:12 p.m. Would all present please identify themselves, beginning with the deponent?
My name is Dr. Joseph Wu.
Richard G. Gibson, Assistant Hamilton County Prosecutor.
Timothy R. Kutcher, attorney for defendant Anthony Kirkland.
Richard G. Wendell, the second attorney as well for Mr. Kirkland.
Would the court reporter please administer the oath?
Please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you're about to give and the cause not pending shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
All right, good afternoon, Dr. Wu.
Good afternoon, Mr. Gibson.
We've had a little break in this case from when you gave your direct examination, so let me kind of recap that, how we left it off. You gave your direct testimony in this case back on November 6, 2017. Is that correct?
Yes.
And you gave that by televideo conference hookup?
Yes.
We were in Cincinnati. I know the representatives of the prosecutor's office and the attorneys for Anthony Kirkland were at an office in Cincinnati. You were somewhere out here in California?
Yes.
Where were you specifically?
I don't recall. There are several different video conferencing sites that I utilize, and so I don't recall which of the several it was.
Okay. But you were out in the California area, in the area near where we are right now?
Yes.
In and around Irvine?
Yes.
Okay. Now, in that testimony that you gave back on November the 6th of 2017, you testified that you had been a witness in 200 to 300 cases. Is that correct?
Yes.
Cases where you had analyzed brain scans, and most of those done in criminal cases. Is that correct?
I would say actually probably mostly done in civil cases.
Okay.
I would say it's about 60-40.
Okay. But you had done many criminal cases where you analyzed brain scans of criminal defendants.
Yes.
And I believe you said you did about 50 Florida cases involving capital defendants that were either going to trial on death penalty cases or in post-conviction hearings on death penalty cases. Is that correct?
Yes, for resentencing hearing.
All right. How many cases do you think? Is 50? That's the number you gave in your direct. Does that sound about right?
That sounds like a approximate ballpark. That sounds about right.
That's not all the criminal cases that you've done. That's what you did out of Florida, correct?
That's correct.
In the criminal cases that you've done, you've always testified for the defense. Is that fair?
Yes.
Never once, not once, testified as a state's witness. Is that correct?
That's correct. I've never been asked by a state's attorney to testify about a misdemeanor.
Well, the reason you've probably not been asked and the reason you haven't testified is, isn't it true that you've always found, when hired by the defense in a case, that your examination of the brain scans revealed traumatic brain injury?
Well, I would say not always true, but I would say that it's true in the vast majority of cases because of the nature of the population that is being referred to me.
So your testimony, is it different now? Because in your direct exam, you said you always had found traumatic brain injuries. Is that not true?
Well, in the case where I have testified, it's typically been brain injury or some psychiatric disease, like bipolar or schizophrenia, or sometimes a combination.
So let me ask this. How many cases were you called in to review traumatic brain scans did you find no evidence of traumatic brain injury? How many?
I would say maybe, I'm thinking a couple, they're fairly rare.
Out of 100?
That sounds about right, yes.
Can you name those cases for me?
No, I'd have to look through my files.
So only on 2 occasions did you not find traumatic brain injury, and yet you don't even recall the cases?
I don't remember. The specific cases, no.
What are the criteria for you when you examine these brain scans for making a finding of traumatic brain injury? What are you looking for, and what do you need before you can say this is evidence of traumatic brain injury?
Well, there are 2 levels of assessment that I utilize currently. The first level is what I call a visual analysis, where I eyeball a scan, and then based on my clinical experience with looking at hundreds of scans, I determine if the scan appears to differ significantly from that of a normal pattern. But then I would say more recently, in the last few years, I've also added what we call a quantitative analysis, so-called observer-independent Z-maps, where a statistical parametric map.
I'm sorry, repeat that?
A statistical parametric map is generated comparing a patient with that of a normal population, and one can then determine if there are significant abnormalities on the Z-map. So this provides kind of a objective, secondary, additional level of analysis.
And you mentioned the normal brain scans, that you have a database that you use to compare to the scans of the person who you've been retained to examine?
Yes.
All right. Where do those norms come from?
They come from UC Irvine.
Okay. And who did those scans?
I did those scans.
And there's scans of whom?
Normal controls.
Who? Students?
I would say it's a mix. There were some students, but there were non-students as well.
Okay. And what's the criteria? You said, are you looking for asymmetry?
I was looking for individuals who initially we screened to see if they had any significant neurological psychiatric history, and then if they had no significant history, then we scanned them.
All right. Now, when you look at a scan and it appears to you to be asymmetrical, is that one of the things that will cause you to call that an abnormal brain scan?
It depends on the degree of asymmetry. There is a certain normal level of asymmetry that occurs in the population. And so the question is the asymmetry to such an extent that it is an aberrant degree of asymmetry? So it's not simply the presence of asymmetry, it's whether the asymmetry is to such a great extent that it is aberrant.
So you agree that even normal brain scans can be asymmetrical?
Oh, certainly. There's
right.
No question about that.
When you talk about do you use a deviation from the norm as a certain factor in determining when that goes from normal to the area of abnormal?
Well, I would say that with this Z-map analysis, I'm using a p-value of 0.01 and a what we call an extent threshold of 30 contiguous voxels, which means that you have to have not just a few voxels that are 0.1 or greater. There has to be 30 of them all connected for this to be considered significant enough and large enough clump of abnormal voxels to be thresholded out.
All right. And when you say 2 deviations from the norm, what does that mean?
Well, 2 deviations from the norm, that is referring to a normal bell curve. And so with a normal bell curve, like with height or, for example, like if you were to look at height for the average 30-year-old male, the average 30-year-old male is about 5 feet 10 inches with a standard deviation of about 3 inches. And so 2 standard deviation would mean that you would take 5 feet 10 inches and you subtract 2 times 3. I mean, that would be 2 standard deviation, since standard deviation 2 times the standard deviation of 3 inches. So 5 feet 10 inches minus 2 times the standard deviation of 3 inches would be 6 inches. So that would be 5'4", and then you would add 2 times the standard deviation of 3 inches to the average to get 6 inches above 5 feet 10, which would be 6 feet 4. So that would mean that 95% of the population would fall between 5 feet 4 inches and 6 feet 10 and 6 feet 4 inches, likely. And so when we're looking at the p-values, the 0.1 is actually greater than 2 standard deviation. It's about approximately 2.5 standard deviation. So,
what kind of deviation do you need before you call something abnormal?
Well, it would have to be approximately equal to a p-value of 0.1, which is approximately 2.5 standard deviations, and would have to have 30 of these voxels stuck together in order for the SPM Z-map to read the area as abnormal.
All right. Now, Dr. Wu, you were contacted at some point in 2009 by the Ohio Public Defender's Office and asked about becoming involved in the case of Anthony Kirkland. Is that correct?
Yes, it was a number of years ago.
Okay. And they had done some interviews. The attorneys or one of their investigators had done some interviews of family members of Kirkland. Is that correct?
Yes.
All right. And one of the things that caused you to believe that you might be able to assist them was some things they indicated in their interviews that Anthony Kirkland may have had some head injury during his life. Is that correct?
Yes.
Because if you're going to talk about traumatic brain injury, there has to be some kind of a trauma. There has to be some kind of an injury, correct?
Yes.
All right. And based upon the interviews they did, you thought you might be able to help.
Yes.
All right. And I think they talked to you about interviews of Kirkland. And there was, for example, and I just for the record, I did not have this at your deposition on November 6th. I appreciate Mr. Wendell being kind enough to make sure I got copies of these. There were a couple of interviews in October and July of 2009 by John Lee, who I believe is an investigator with the Ohio Public Defender.
Yes.
And the first one being an interview on June 23rd of 2009 at the Justice Center. I guess the sum total of what he noted in this page-and-a-half interview as far as injuries to Mr. Kirkland is him saying he had gone to the hospital on several occasions, that he had been involved in fights resulting in some broken bones, that he dislocated his shoulder in a bike accident. You mentioned the bike accident in your direct, did you not?
Yes, I think that was a 2004 bike accident.
Yeah, but Anthony Kirkland didn't say he injured his head in this interview, according to what I'm reading. Is this what you read?
I read many documents, and that
Okay.
was one of many documents I read, yes.
So he never mentioned anything about a head injury. He said he dislocated his shoulder, said he was in a car accident, but didn't specify what kind of an injury he had. Is that one of the things you would have read or been made aware of?
I mean, I know that, let's see here, okay, and my notes about that. I know that he had some type of accident in 2004. Let's see. I think October 11th, 2004, when he was 36, and he had a right-sided facial fracture. And certainly, if you have a fracture of the face is part of the head, and brain is inside the head, you know, a force that's sufficient to cause a facial fracture is certainly sufficient to cause a traumatic brain injury.
That information is from where, Dr. Wu?
Let's see. You know, I don't recall specifically which report I saw this in. I summarized information about his history, but I didn't note all the sources in the summary, and so I can. It would take me some time to. There were hundreds of pages, and I think in retrospect, I probably should have documented each statement and the source. You know, I just documented salient statements that I thought would be relevant to the case. But when I was doing the record review, I didn't record a source, and I could go back and do that. It's just that, you know,
The source is what gets this whole thing started, right?
Well,
the source reporting an injury to Anthony Kirkland.
It was in a set of CDs that were provided to me by Mr. Ancona. He had hundreds of pages in there, and so I knew it was on those 4 CDs that he sent to me.
Right.
But and I assumed that everyone had those 4 CDs with those documents, and so I didn't think it was critical to document it because I thought, you know, people would know the documents on there. But I guess, you know, that was, I think in retrospect, I probably would have documented the exact page and et cetera, you know, from each CD that the information came from. So.
Right. Then in July of 2009, July 16th, there was another interview by the defendant with a John Lee, that same investigator. Mm-hmm. And the only mention he made of being injured was when he reported that his father would sometimes hit him with his hand or his fist. But he reported he would beat him whenever he did anything bad, but it never led to a necessity to seek medical treatment from the beatings. Is that right?
Well,
the beating stopped when he was age 14?
Yes, and he was physically abused by his alcoholic, sounding like bipolar father from the ages of 6 till 14, and that he was older of 4, that he took the brunt of the anger that the father had when the father was temperamental, and that he had contusions to his head, according to some of the documents I read, which would certainly be consistent with significant force being applied to the head. And kids' heads are very delicate, especially before the age of 12. We know from studies done that, for example, if you look at professional football players who started playing football before age 12 and who started playing football after age 12, those who started playing football before age 12, have a higher rate of chronic traumatic encephalopathy than those who started playing after the age of 12. So we know that the brain before age 12 is especially sensitive to multiple concussions, and so judging from the history that I obtained through the records I reviewed, it seemed quite clear that he was struck on the head multiple times between the ages of 6 and 14.
Who said anything about the head? Anthony Kirkland said he was hit with a hand or a fist. Who said anything about the head?
Well, there was one of the reports that stated that he had contusions to the head. The contusion to the head would have to come from some kind of head being struck.
And who said that again?
Again, I don't recall the source. I mean, I can go back and find the source, but I don't have it written down currently.
Do you recall the interview that Mr. Lee did with Carol Spencer Kirkland's mother and Daniel Palmer, his brother?
I mean, I read all those records, yes.
When she talked about injuries, she said he got a head injury while working at Queen City Barrel.
Right, in 1985.
Okay.
And they had memory loss from that, and he was treated at Mayfield Neurological.
She didn't say anything in this interview about memory loss.
Well, again, one of the other documents I read indicated that there was memory loss.
But you didn't cite that. You didn't.
I mean, I have it in my report, but I didn't cite the specific page and the source for that information. But everything in my report, I didn't make any of this stuff up. You know, it was all in those 4 CDs.
And in the interview with them, the brother said, again, Anthony fell down a hill while riding a bike and dislocated his shoulder. No mention about a head injury.
Well,
right? So why did you bring the bicycle accident up in the...
Because there was a report that he had a right-sided facial fracture.
Not in the bike accident.
In the bicycle accident, October 11, 2004,
Okay.
that was treated at Mercy Franciscan Hospital.
Okay, we'll look that up in just a second. Then there was the interview of by Mr. Lee on October 10th of Angela Kirkland, his sister. She made no reference at all to Anthony Kirkland ever being injured, did she? All she talked about was how he abused her both sexually and physically, right?
That's correct. I mean, that's an accurate summary of her statement. That's correct. That's an accurate summary of her statement.
All right. Although you got this information from the state public defender, you weren't retained, you did not work or testify in that first trial. Is that correct?
That's correct.
All right. But you did get some other information from them later. Is that correct?
I got information on multiple occasions, and so.
All right, if I could, let me refer to deposition, state's deposition exhibit 1. You're aware that in 2009, he was in January of 2009, he was in the Hamilton County, or I think he was in, the University Hospital on the psych ward, is that correct? And they had him taken to University Hospital
Yes.
to have some scans done, is that correct?
Right, an MRI.
They had an MRI brain scan done. Now, again, this was done January 13th, 2009, is that correct?
Yes.
And it was done at University Hospital. Are you
Yes.
familiar with that hospital?
Not specifically, no.
You don't know them. They have a widely, highly regarded reputation.
I have no
Objection
reason
as an answer.
to dispute that.
Okay. And in deposition exhibit 1, he had an MRI brain scan without contrast performed there.
Yes.
All right. And this, again, this is January 13th of 2009.
Right.
This would have been within about 6 to 18 months after he had killed Cassandra Crawford, Kimya Rollison, and Mary Jo Newton, and about 2 months or so before he would kill Esme Kenny.
Yes.
So it's right in the time frame when these things were happening. Is that correct?
Yes.
And the finding on that MRI from January of 2009 was normal. Is that correct?
It was read as an unremarkable MRI.
Unremarkable MR examination of the brain without mass, hemorrhage, or acute infarct.
Yes.
So they found a normal brain scan. They did not find evidence of traumatic brain injury.
See, this type of brain MRI is very insensitive to the detection of traumatic brain injury. You can actually get a normal, unremarkable MRI of a cadaver's brain or someone who's in a coma. And so simply because the brain scan is read as unremarkable doesn't really mean that the person is even alive or is capable of becoming conscious because it just means the shape and structure of the brain is normal. And so it's very insensitive at detecting brain injury because many brain injuries occur at a microscopic level that affect function. That's why a functioning brain scan is much more sensitive and accurate at the detection of brain injury than a conventional MRI of the brain.
You never did ask to look at this brain scan or get records from this MRI that was done?
If it was unremarkable, I thought that it was not really going to make a significant difference because it's well known that many people with brain injuries have normal brain MRI scans, and but that doesn't mean that the function of the brain is normal. And in fact, in Mr. Kirkland's case, it clearly was not normal. It was clearly consistent with.
Are you saying it was not normal in 2009? You never saw his brain scan in 2009, did you?
I'm saying that based on the PET scan that he had obtained, that there was clear evidence of old brain injuries. And if you look at his history, he clearly has multiple instances in which he could have sustained multiple brain injuries, beginning from the time he was a child and he was being physically abused by his father, and then when he was 17, when there was this accident at Queen City Barrow in 1985, and memory loss was noted, and then in 2004, we had this bicycle accident with a right-sided facial fracture created at Mercy Franciscan Hospital, and after that particular incident, he was known to show a significant change in his personality by Roberta Baldwin, who said that prior to that accident in 2004, that he had been an active member of the church, he had a job, he was helping her out with her kids, he was helping her out with her bills. After that, he became homeless. His behavior resulted in him no longer being welcome in the church, that he was incapable of holding a job. So there was a clear behavioral change after this 2004 accident.
That's not what his mother attributed his change in behavior to, is it? Didn't she attribute it to his hanging with older men who would drink and use drugs, and he started emulating their behavior? Isn't that what the mother, in her interview by the state public defender, attributed that change to? Not to some injury he suffered?
I have no reason to dispute the fact that that's what the mother states, but I believe that it's quite clear to me that his behavior changed significantly after this 2004 bicycle accident, and going from having a home and to becoming homeless and being out of a van, having a job and being welcome at a church and no longer being welcome at a church. I'm sorry. I mean, clearly there was a very significant behavioral change that occurred after this 2004 bicycle accident.
Well, how do you pick and choose what you believe and don't believe? You believe what this Baldwin woman said, but not what the mother said or the brother said.
I'm not disbelieving that the mother believes that that's what happened, but the mother is not a physician.
Neither is the Baldwin woman.
No, but the Baldwin woman is...
Objection argument of...
she is observing firsthand his behavior, and so she has a firsthand view of what his behavior is like.
As is the mother.
Not as close as Roberta. Roberta has a closer view, in my opinion, than the mother would have had at that age, and she clearly saw a significant change after this bicycle accident.
Okay. Then there was another, you had a report of this other scan that was done on him in January 26th of 07. That was after the car crash, is that correct?
Yes.
And again, it was done at University Hospital?
Yes.
And the findings are by the doctor, I do not think he has a significant head injury. CAT CT of the head did not show any hemorrhage or mass effect. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
No, it's the same issue though, that a structural...
That's 2007. That's after the bike accident as well. Is that correct?
Objection. Let him answer the question.
It's the same issue. Structural brain imaging is very insensitive for the detection of brain injuries. And so that you can even have a normal CT of the brain with a cadaver. So just because the structure of the brain is normal doesn't mean that the function of the brain is normal. And that's why a PET scan is a much better test.
All right, well, I'll come back to that. Let me identify deposition, state's deposition exhibit number 6. These are the medical records that relate to his Mercy Franciscan trip after the bike accident. Is that correct?
Yes.
All right. And the history of the present illness that was given by the patient, 36-year-old who fell off his bike and injured his shoulder. He was not unconscious. The diagnosis is left shoulder dislocation. There's nothing in there about any fracture or any injury to the head or the face.
I'm going to object. I think it does indicate facial pain on that same line.
patient is awake and alert, some tenderness over the right zygoma.
His zygoma is part of the face.
It doesn't diagnose any fracture, which is what you're talking about, right? You relied on that, and there's no fracture.
I relied on that, but there are other statements that indicated in the hundreds of pages that there was a fracture.
Okay, and you indicate that these injuries showed a marked change in his personality in about 2004, and you base that on the Baldwin woman, his girlfriend, is that correct?
Yes.
All right. Isn't it a fact that he was exhibiting extremely violent behavior well before 2004?
That's true.
His sister talks about him abusing her and her friends, is that correct?
Objection.
That's true. He has episodes of violent behavior that his sister noted.
And then there's deposition, State's Deposition Exhibit 2. That's the pre-sentence investigation for a homicide he committed in May 1987, when he killed his uncle's girlfriend and set the house on fire to cover that up.
Objection.
Well before the bike accident or the car accident, correct?
Before you answer, we will object to this question. We believe that this improperly introduces evidence that is irrelevant. We believe that any probative value is significantly outweighed by inappropriate prejudicial effect. We believe that introduction of this type of evidence is violative of Mr. Kirkland's due process rights and rights to a fair trial. Thank you. You may proceed.
My response would be this: relevant based upon Dr. Wu's theory that an accident or an injury Kirkland suffered in 2004 caused the brain injury, which led to his violent outburst. He was violent, as I said, based on this evidence well before that.
What I have also said, though, that he clearly had a history of being physically abused as a child, with contusions to his head by his father from...
Which I haven't seen any documentation of.
And again,
Objection, argumentative.
that doesn't mean that, I wouldn't make these kind of things up. And I'm sure I can find the citation, but it's going to take a significant amount of time to page through hundreds of pages, and I don't want to use this time in the deposition for that purpose.
Doctor, you've had since November 6th of last year, have you not?
Well, I've had many other things going on in my life as well, many other cases I've been involved in.
All right, so in support of a post-conviction claim, in this case that was filed on Kirkland's behalf, and the Ohio Supreme Court ordering a new sentencing hearing for him, his attorneys then asked you to come on board and look at the brain scans of Anthony Kirkland. Is that correct?
Yes.
They went to Judge Dinkelhocker and asked him to appoint you in the case, and he did that. Is that correct?
Yes.
All right. And he also signed an order at the request you made through the attorneys to have Anthony Kirkland transported to a hospital for a brain scan. Is that correct?
I believe 3 different types of brain scans.
Correct. 2 types of MRIs.
Yes.
And a PET scan.
Yes.
Because PET scan is what you feel is necessary to do this. Is that correct? To look for this injury?
I believe all 3 of these scans are helpful in the assessment of suspected brain injury.
And in fact, based upon that order signed by Judge Dinkelhocker, Kirkland was transported to the Ohio State University Wexner Medical Center in Columbus on 2 different occasions. Is that correct?
Yes.
Do you know the reputation of that medical facility?
I imagine it's very good. I mean, I don't know that area very well specifically.
You've never been there? You never?
No, I've never. I mean, I've been to Ohio to do the case Western, 30 years ago. But
you didn't go there for these PET scans?
No, I
the
didn't.
PET scan and these MRIs, is that correct?
That's correct.
You stayed here in California?
That's correct.
But you would have written out an order for them to be done, is that correct?
Yes.
It's like, I guess, a prescription for medication. You write an order for a procedure to be done.
Yes.
You direct how you want it done.
Yes.
Do you remember what protocol you requested for these procedures?
I believe the PET scan was a rescue PET scan.
Okay. And there's another procedure you can do called an activation protocol. Is that correct?
Yes.
What's the difference in the 2?
Well, an activation PET scan utilizes a activation task during the uptake of the radioactive sugar molecule, and so the activation task that I have used in many cases is a vigilance task, and there is a significant...
I'm going to enter an objection at this point. We can agree that he ordered a at-rest test. The fact that there's also could have ordered a activation protocol is irrelevant. We're comparing apples to apples.
Go ahead with your answer.
Visual vigilance task is a task that can be employed during the uptake of the radioactive sugar. And so this is one way of doing a PET scan. I think the other way is a resting PET scan where radioactive sugar molecule is administered when the subjects are at rest, not doing any particular task.
It wants to be in a dark, soothing environment while that test is administered, correct?
A dimly lit room, eyes open, yes.
Why in this case did you request the resting exam?
Well, I think that a resting scan is easier logistically to perform if the center doesn't have experience with activation scans. And then if the suspected pathology is significant, a resting scan is adequate or sufficient to detect a significant pathology. I would say that if the suspected pathology was very subtle, then I think an activation scan would be more sensitive and accurate at detecting small, subtle abnormalities, but judging from the history and the behavioral abnormalities that I received about Mr. Kirkland, I did not suspect that his abnormalities were going to be subtle or mild. So
I did not suspect what?
His abnormalities would be subtle or mild. And so I did not feel it was necessary to use a more sensitive, more complicated test when it seemed that, judging from his history, the resting scan would be logistically easier and would be more than capable of detecting pathology.
Did you ever contact the doctors at the university hospital and talk to them about the scans that you wanted done?
No, I don't recall doing that. My recollection is that I wrote a prescription.
And do you know what protocol they used?
I believe they used a resting protocol.
You believe that?
Yes.
Okay. Now, when you do these scans, there are certain things that you don't want them to do the morning of the scan. You don't want them to smoke. Is that true? You don't want them to take medication that might affect how this comes out?
I think that medication is in general, I think, not going to have a huge effect on a scan. And if you look at the procedure guidelines for PET scan, medications in general are considered to have a fairly minor effect on a scan, so I don't think that's a huge issue in terms of clinical testing. There are, unless there are certain medications that have certain effects, like antipsychotic medications can elevate striatal metabolism.
Was Kirkland on any of that type of medication at the time? You don't know, do you?
I would have to review my notes. I don't recall.
Is it fair to say you did not call the prison that was housing him and tell them on the day that you transport him to Ohio State, make sure he doesn't take any antipsychotic medication?
I didn't think
I'm going to object here that there's no evidence that he did take any medication or smoked or did anything other than what the doctor prescribed.
So will you please answer my question, Dr. Wu?
Yeah,
did you make such a call?
I did not call the prison. I did not feel that it was necessary for me to do that.
You never have, since that was performed, complained about the scans that were done, have you? Have you ever complained about either one of them?
No.
As far as you were concerned, your order was followed?
As far as I can tell, yes.
And they were properly done. There's no reason to think that the tests were done improperly?
No.
Okay. In the order that you wrote, do you remember writing this sentence? please defer DTI interpretation?
Yes.
Why did you write that?
Well, I would say that in my experience, most facilities don't have the capability of doing quantitative DTI analysis, and so I felt that it would be easier just to get it off the table.
Easier?
Yes,
What does that phrase mean? Please defer DTI interpretation.
Could we identify the exhibit here?
I'm sorry, this is in State's Deposition Exhibit 3, and I can give you, it's on a numbered page, page 10. It's in the orders from Dr. Wu.
Just a moment, please. Is this what you're referring to here? It's right there.
Yeah.
Okay.
What does that mean? What are you asking them not to do?
well, I'm asking them not to interpret the DTI scan.
Because you didn't want their opinion in that report?
I felt that my experience in general has been that most radiologists have very limited experience with DTI.
Isn't it true that what you knew was that you were going to find traumatic brain injury and an abnormal scan, and that they likely would find a normal scan?
I mean, I suspected there would be a high probability that he would show abnormalities given his history, and I, the average radiologist has very little experience with DTI, TBI, and I didn't want someone who's inexperienced reading a scan.
The average radiologist?
Yes.
That's what these guys do every single day.
Objection argumentative.
What makes you think they're in any way average?
Well, my experience, most radiologists, especially at that time, had very little experience with DTI compared to the experience I've had.
Dr. Wu, you're not a radiologist, and you're not a neuroradiologist. You're
Yes.
a psychiatrist, is that correct?
That's correct. But I have extensive experience with PET, DTI, and quantitative volumetrics.
All right. But you didn't want them rendering an opinion that might be contrary to yours.
I didn't want people who would likely have much less experience reading the scan in the DTI portion.
All right. So in any event, pursuant to the orders that Judge Dinkelhocker signed, is it your understanding that Anthony Kirkland was transferred to the Ohio State University Wexner Medical Center on October 6th?
Yes.
And a PET scan was administered?
Yes.
All right. Again, you don't have any complaints about that scan or the way it was done or who performed it or anything like that? It was done by an Ohio State University radiologist named Chadwick Wright. You know Dr. Wright?
No, I do not know Mr. Wright.
You don't have any reason to believe he's not an outstanding radiologist, do you?
I have no reason to believe that he's not an outstanding radiologist, but I have reason to believe that he probably has little experience with looking at PET scans for patients with suspected brain injuries.
Well, that's because that's not even an approved protocol for minor head injuries.
Objection, it assumes we're talking about minor injuries.
I would say that most radiologists have little experience with looking at PET scans for traumatic brain injury. Most of them use PET scans predominantly for cancer studies, and if they see a brain that doesn't have cancer, then
they're approved for that purpose, are they not?
It is approved for that purpose.
And it's approved for identifying, diagnosing dementia?
Yes.
It's not approved in this case for finding traumatic brain injury. Is that correct?
Well, I would say that there are clinical textbooks that document the fact that PET scans can be used for the assessment of traumatic brain injury. They may not be covered by insurances, but that doesn't mean that they can't be used clinically in that way.
We'll come back to that. Do you recall the findings that Dr. Wright made after he performed this PET scan?
I believe that his scan finding was that the scan was unremarkable.
It clearly differs from your opinion, is that correct?
Yes.
There is no suspicious focus, and I'm on page 4 of State's Deposition Exhibit 3. There is no suspicious focus.
Objection. We need to go off the record for a minute. This was your, oh, we're off the record. Yeah.
We are off the record. The time is 1:55 p.m. We are back on the record. The time is 2 p.m.
Doctor, what I was asking you before when we went off the record, Dr. Wright made some findings. There is no suspicious focus of abnormally increased or decreased FDG uptake identified within the cerebral or cerebellar hemispheres. On the non-contrast enhanced CT images, there are non-specific calcifications noted within the basal ganglia impression. There is no PET evidence of abnormal FDG uptake within the brain. That's his findings?
Yes.
He's essentially saying, this is a normal brain scan. I do not find evidence of any traumatic brain injury.
Yes.
And that certainly disagrees with you. Is that correct?
Yes.
All right. Kirkland was returned to the prison and then brought back to Ohio State University's Wexner Medical Center on October the 11th, and a doctor performed the MRI brain scans.
Right, Dr. Bolter, I believe?
Dr. Daniel Bolter, that's correct. Do you know Dr. Bolter?
I don't know.
Ever heard of him?
I
He's a
have
neuroradiologist.
Never heard of him previously.
Any reason to believe he's not an outstanding neuroradiologist?
No reason.
All right. All right, he did those scans and they were sent on to you. And again, you never complained about those scans. You never said, we need to redo those. You didn't do what I asked or anything like that.
No, I had no complaints with the scan.
And these two scans from Dr. Wright and now from Dr. Bolter are scans you received and you relied on in your comparisons with your database of normal resting brain scans.
Yes.
Okay. When Dr. Bolter did the MRI, did he agree with the opinion you would later render in this case?
I believe that he viewed this as an unremarkable MRI, if I recall correctly.
Yeah, he did. He found it to be normal, in a word, what all these highlighted things. No parenchymal signal abnormally is identified, no evidence of edema or mass lesion, no evidence of hemorrhage, no diffusion, restriction, or other evidence of acute infarct is identified. He says that it's normal brain scan, no evidence of traumatic brain injury. Is that correct?
That's what he stated based on the kind of exam that he focused on, which are predominantly the less sensitive method of assessing for brain injuries on an MRI scan. He clearly did not utilize a quantitative approach towards assessment of DTI, and he clearly did not use a quantitative approach towards the assessment of volumetrics, which are much more sensitive and accurate at detecting brain injuries.
Is that why you asked that he defer DTI interpretation? Because that's exactly what you didn't want to see in a report?
I requested that because I requested that because
I'm going to object at this point. Dr. Bolter does say exactly why. Says, please note, however, that the quantitative voxel-wise analysis was not performed.
And why?
As this is not routinely available outside of research settings.
Correct.
And so he didn't do the same kind of exam that Dr. Wu did.
Well, thank you. Doctor, the fact of the matter is you had already decided you were going to find evidence of traumatic brain injury, correct? Based upon the interviews you heard.
I suspected that there was a high probability that his scans would show such findings, but I was not going to prejudge it until I actually saw the evidence.
You weren't going to prejudge it?
Yeah. Well,
You're 100%. You're 100% at finding traumatic brain injury in these types of scans.
Objection argumentative.
Is that about right?
I would say that there have been cases where I did not find abnormalities, so that
Name one.
Well, as I stated, these were older cases that I do not recall the names of.
Isn't the fact that you're being paid to find traumatic brain injury, Dr. Bolter's being paid simply to do a test? He doesn't have a dog in the fight.
I believe that Dr. Bolter is not using the most sensitive and accurate means of assessing a scan that he's, and when you use less sensitive and not up-to-date methods of assessing the brain, you're going to miss significant abnormalities.
The doctors sent along to you the scans that they did, is that correct?
Yes.
That you had written orders for?
Yes.
And once you received those, you used those and compared those to the normal brain scans in your normal database, is that correct?
Yes.
And it's based upon that comparison that you wrote your report, is that correct?
Yes.
That's not all they sent along to you. They also sent along a copy of the reports that they made with their findings, isn't that true?
Yes.
All right. When you finished your report, you sent along to Kirkland's then attorneys, you sent along to them your report and the scans, correct?
Yes.
But you didn't send along the report that you got from Doctors Wright and Bolter, did you?
I don't recall specifically.
You don't remember that from your last deposition?
You know, I have no reason to dispute it. It's just
Well, the only way we got those reports from the Ohio State Medical Center was to contact Kirkland's then attorneys who contacted you, correct? You have a recollection of that?
Objection.
I mean, I would imagine that.
Just a minute. All right, this is Dr. Wu's deposition. He should be testifying, not the prosecutor.
This is cross-examination, Tim.
I agree.
Okay? All right. You understand my question?
Can you restate the question, please?
Why did you not send along to Kirkland's then attorneys the reports from the doctor, Dr. Wright and Dr. Bolter, when you sent back your report, sent them your report and the scans that those doctors did? Why did you not send along their reports with their findings?
I had assumed that they would have obtained those reports directly from the center and that they were interested primarily in my reports.
And then they were what?
They were interested primarily in my reports, not reports that I had assumed they could have received from the center directly.
Okay. You wrote the order, though, correct?
Yes.
So the stuff would come to you.
But people ask for copies of records, especially if they're the guardians, representative of a patient from a medical center all the time, and can get it directly from the medical center. I assume that the attorneys would be the guardians and could have requested a copy of those reports directly from the medical center. They wouldn't need me to obtain it and send it to them.
Well, you were contacted by Mr. Alvin, correct? And you ultimately did send him those reports?
Yes.
Okay. You weren't hiding them from us, is that what you're saying?
No, I mean, I just assumed that he had it already. I didn't think it was necessary to resend it, but he was saying that he did have it, so I said, okay, fine, I'll send it.
Okay, so now you remember that?
Based on our discussion now, yes.
This is Deposition Exhibit 4. This is a letter Mr. Alvin wrote to me explaining that he contacted you and you sent the reports along to him. That's how we got them, right?
I mean, I don't know exactly how you received them. I mean, I know what I did, but I'm not sure.
You sent them to Mr. Alvin when he called you and asked for them?
Yes.
Okay. Were you hiding those from us?
No.
You remember testifying at the November deposition? And do you remember being asked those questions and saying, you do understand discovery, that we're entitled to see things and that what you give to those lawyers is going to come to us?
Yeah, I assume that that's going to be true.
Do you remember what your explanation for why we didn't get those reports before Mr. Alvin called you was?
I don't recall exactly what I stated.
That they just got lost in the shuffle?
That may have very well been. I mean, there were a lot of records.
All right. Do you know Dr. Alan Waxman?
I mean, I know him, yes. I've chatted with him on a number of occasions.
He heads the Cedars-Sinai Medical Center's Radiology and Nuclear Imaging Center?
Yes.
Okay. Any question about his qualifications and his expertise in this field?
Well, he's certainly a certified nuclear medicine specialist and
Certified what?
nuclear medicine specialist. I butted heads with him on many occasions.
Do you know what your reputation is in the medical legal field involving brain scan examination?
Well, I suppose it depends on who you ask. You know, I know I've been asked to give keynote addresses to, for example, the American Association of Justice, and it's you know, considered a prestigious kind of forum. And I've been asked to give lectures to the American Conference Institute on brain injury, and that's more of a defense-oriented forum. And so, you know, I've been asked to give lots of talks by different people.
Would you agree that a considerable portion of the people in your field consider you a charlatan who will say or do anything for a few bucks? I would be very disinclined to believe that to be true. I haven't seen any objective information or evidence that would back up that claim. That may be the unsubstantiated opinion of an opposing expert, but there's no objective data that backs up that claim. Well, do you agree that a large part of the people in your field consider that you use these brain scans for a purpose that the governing bodies don't think is an appropriate use?
Objection. Students back on evidence.
I disagree with that. I mean, I haven't seen any objective evidence, any surveys, any numerical data that would back up that kind of allegation.
What groups of AMA recognized status have approved PET scans for the clinical purpose of establishing a diagnosis of brain injury from minor head trauma?
Well, I would say that...
Name me the groups.
That there are textbooks that have, for example, functional cerebral PET and SPECT imaging, which is a highly regarded textbook now in its 4th edition, which have a whole chapter on use of PET scans in the assessment of brain injuries, including minor brain injuries. And this is a textbook that is used at many nuclear medicine or residencies. It's sold widely, and this is an authoritative text.
What is the American Academy of Neurology's position on PET or SPECT scans in the evaluation of minor head trauma at a time remote from the injury? What is their position on that?
Objection. Answer if you know.
I know that they had a position paper that's about 30 years old that they said at that time, 30 years ago, that they didn't feel there was sufficient evidence.
Have they changed that position?
I don't think they've changed this 30-year-old paper, despite the fact that there are a significant number of peer-reviewed publications that have come out, but societies don't always update their position papers to reflect the state of the art.
What about the American College of Radiology? What's their position on the use of these types of scans for minor or mild acute closed head injury?
Well,
objection. Answer if you know.
I know that it depends on I've seen some guidelines by the American College of Radiology in which they stated that they felt it was a 4 out of 9 at some point in time.
Not the document I'm looking at. It's a number 1, which is usually not appropriate.
Well, I would agree that it's not something that you would do for the average brain injury case, but I would say that in a case where it's a matter of life or death, and you're trying to get the most sensitive and accurate method of assessing the brain injury, I would say under those circumstances, in my opinion, would be appropriate, but I would agree that if someone came in and had a concussion from a motor vehicle accident, that it's not something that I would agree, it's not appropriate for that kind of case.
Dr. Wu, would you agree with me that the manner in which you examine and compare brain scans assures a finding of traumatic brain injury? It makes it inevitable.
No, I do not agree with that.
But you're 100%.
Based on the kind of patients I refer to me, the kind of patients I refer to me are patients like Mr. Kirkland, patients with significant behavioral pathology, significant history of multiple neurological instances, including being physically abused from the ages as a young child for multiple occasions, and having an accident when he was 17 where he had memory loss, and then having a bicycle accident in 2004 where he had a significant personality change. When you have this kind of patient who's referred to you it's not surprising that these kind of scans going to show abnormalities. These are not the average person.
We're still talking about the bike crash, and the bike crash had nothing to do with it.
Objection.
You're not letting me
Finish
finish
your
my
answer.
answer. You're interrupting. How can I answer when you're interrupting? I've lost my train of thought now. I'm sorry.
You finished?
Let's see. Yes, now I recall. So I was saying that when you have the kind of patient where you have someone who's been physically abused multiple occasions by the father from the time they were a young child to an early teenager, when they have a industrial accident where there's a memory loss, when they have a bicycle accident where there's a personality change, these kinds of instances are significant neurological events. It's not, and these are the kind of patients that are referred to me for brain scan. It's not surprising that these kind of patients have significant abnormalities. These are not normal people picked at random from the street.
Doctor, if an attorney has a client that's charged with a capital offense, can he contact you to assist in preparing mitigation, be assured that you'll find his client has traumatic brain injury?
I can't guarantee it. All I can say is that I will look, and if the evidence is there, I'm happy to document what I find. But
Up to this point, it's been 100%, hasn't it?
no, you're misstating the evidence. I stated that there have been a couple of occasions where there was no abnormalities. So when you state 100%, you're
A couple in how many? 100?
yes,
125?
but that's not 100%. You're misstating the evidence, and you're mischaracterizing my prior testimony.
You've made a lot of money doing this, have you not?
Well,
How much you been paying? Well, go ahead and finish up before I ask the next one.
I mean, I have been paid for my services.
How much were you paid in this case?
Well, I would say in the 2017 case, I was paid about $9,990.
So about 10 grand?
Yes,
Okay. And you didn't do the scans?
that's correct.
You just got some discs of scans? I don't know, so is that the format they came to you on discs?
Yes,
And you looked at those and compared it with things you already had? You put out a report that pretty much was boilerplate, that had already been written and used in other cases?
Objection.
Is that true or not?
well, I would say that the methodology is the same, but the findings differ from each patient. So if I use the same methodology, the methodology is going to be the same when the methodology is the same. So, but the findings differ, so they are depending on the patient.
All right. Doctor, if you start finding normal brain scans, you're going to be killing the goose that's laying the golden egg for you. Is that a fair statement?
Objection.
True?
I think that's argumentative. I think that's I am ethical, and I call it as I see it. And if there's no finding there, I'm happy to call it.
Twice.
And so I adhere to a code of ethics, and I believe in telling the truth. And so it's true that the vast majority of cases have the kind of history with significant neurological psychiatric problems, and that these methods are very sensitive, and so it's not surprising that a very large percentage of them show abnormalities, but I can't guarantee that, and I can't guarantee a finding. All I do is I report what I see.
Doctor, where are we doing this deposition today? Here in Newport Beach as opposed to University of Cal Irvine?
I retired from the University of California, Irvine in March of last year after 30 years of service.
You retired?
Yes.
They didn't fire you?
No.
You sure about that?
Yes.
I'm finished. I don't have any further questions of Dr. Wu.
May I have Exhibit 3, please?
Sure.
Thank you. Dr. Wu.
Thank you, Mr. Cryer, I appreciate it. Ladies and gentlemen, that was an hour, okay, and I'm trying to break this up for you a little bit. We can do it one of two ways. I'm going to stand up. I'm going to ask you to do that at least. Stand up, stretch a little bit, or if anybody need to go back real quick, Somebody, okay, yeah, that's fine. I'm looking for a head shake, that's fine. I will take a very short break, take as much time as you need. Remember the admonitions, don't talk about it, don't read about it, don't think about it. We'll see you back in a little bit. Please be seated, ladies and gentlemen. Anything for the record at this point to state? Thank you from the fence. Okay, thank you very much. We'll try to keep this as brief as possible. We'll see you back 5-10 minutes and we'll keep rolling. Okay, thank you all very much. Okay, please be seated, ladies and gentlemen. Again, thank you very much for your cooperation. Ms. Crowder, whenever you're ready, thank you.
Why did you order 3 separate tests?
I ordered 3 separate tests because I felt that they each show a different parameter or property of the brain, and that each of these methodologies are sensitive for detecting different characteristics of brain injuries or pathologies.
Doctor, what's the first step in evaluating a PET scan?
Well, the first step in evaluating a PET scan is what we call a visual analysis. That's where I eyeball scan and report whether or not I think that there are any abnormalities based upon the patterns that I observe and based upon my years of clinical experience in reviewing scans to determine if these patterns are normal or abnormal.
And basically, is that what a radiologist does?
That's what the average radiologist physician who interprets PET scans do, is that they eyeball a scan to look at whether or not they have an abnormal pattern.
I'd like you to look at State's Exhibit 3 on page 12. And read what it says under the DTI test.
Let's see. So under the DTI test, it says, please note, however, that quantitative voxel-wise analysis was not performed, as this is not routinely available outside of research setting and may not provide clinically relevant findings in individual patients.
Okay, so they didn't do any quantitative or qualitative analysis, not because you told them not to, but because they don't do it.
And that appears to be their practice, that they don't do a quantitative analysis of DTI scans, despite the fact that it is clinically accepted. There are clinical guidelines on how to do a DTI analysis published by the American Society of Functional Neuroradiology.
I'd like you to look at what's been marked for identification as Defendant's Exhibit 3O.
Yes.
Can you identify that?
This is the corpus callosum tractography of Mr. Anthony Kirkland. And these are two different sides. This is the left-sided view of his brain, the corpus callosum tractography, and this is the right-sided view of his brain, the corpus callosum tractography. And one of the things that's immediately apparent that there is a significant asymmetry with the right side of the corpus callosum missing the fiber tracts that are evident on the left side. Now, typically, a corpus callosum tractography is symmetrical, kind of like a mirror or a face, with both halves of the face being approximately symmetrical, not perfectly symmetrical. What we're seeing here is a very gross, atypical difference between the right side of the corpus callosum tractography with the posterior fibers missing compared to the left side. Now, this is the kind of abnormality that we would see in someone who sustained a traumatic brain injury that damages the axon in the right back of his brain.
Sorry, that damages the what?
The axons in the right back of his brain. So this is something that is clearly evident without any kind of quantitative analysis. This is something that can be obtained by a visual analysis of the tractography.
And when these tests were taken at Ohio State, did they do tractography?
I did not see any tractography analyses done by them.
Okay. So these are the results that you found from their test, applying your qualitative and quantitative analysis.
Well, this is a qualitative analysis of the tractography, which they evidently did not do, although this is something that they certainly, I'm sure, could have done had they chosen to do so. It is something that is used in many clinical settings, and they clearly chose not to do a quantitative analysis.
Now, the second test was called an MRI volumetrics.
Yes.
And what does that do?
Well, MRI quantitative volumetrics measures with very high accuracy and precision different structures of the brain, like the amygdala or the ventricles. And this is very helpful because it has been shown that the human eye, even with a very experienced and good radiologist, is incapable of detecting significant differences in the volume of brain structures. And there are peer-reviewed papers that have been published that have shown that the human eye is incapable of this kind of detection. Whereas it's quite clinically important now to be able to measure these brain regions, because one can obtain very important clinical information when one obtains a statistical analysis of the different structures in the brain. And Mr. Kirkland had a number of very profound differences statistically in the measurement of his brain volumes.
And how do you measure the brain volume?
There's a company called Cortex. This is an FDA-approved all the different regions of the brain. They're sort of like a brain ruler, and it's very accurate at detecting regions of the brain, such as the hippocampus or the amygdala. They use a computer program that goes through a process called segmentation, which parses out or pulls out different structures of the brain and then measures them with the aid of a computer. And so this is the kind of thing that used to be done by humans. And so to measure different structures in a brain, it would take a couple of graduate students, probably a week full time, to measure the brain regions. It can now be measured in less than an hour by computer with probably the same precision. And so something that was impractical previously, like as with so many other things with computers, is now eminently practical and has very invaluable clinical diagnostic information.
And what about the third test? What's the third test?
Well, the third test was the PET scan, which we have been discussing, which is a measure of sugar metabolism in the brain. Sugar is the main fuel for the brain. Sugar is the equivalent of gasoline for a car. So we know that when the neurons are firing, they need fuel. The fuel for the neurons firing is sugar. And so parts of the brain that are more active need more fuel, more sugar, and parts of the brain that are less active need less fuel or less sugar. And so by taking a radioactive sugar molecule and seeing where there is a large amount of sugar being consumed, and seeing where there is a small amount of sugar being consumed, we can generate a map of sugar metabolism which corresponds to neuronal firing or functioning. And so, for example, if we take the corpse and we got a normal MRI of the brain such as the corpse, if you administer a radioactive sugar molecule to a corpse, you would have zero sugar being metabolized. And so you get a blank screen. And so this is one stark example of how the ability to measure sugar metabolism can help differentiate whether a person is dead or alive, something that this CT or MRI scan in many cases cannot do with a cadaver. And you could take someone who is comatose, and this person's brain may be minimally functioning, and so you would see a very low amount of sugar being metabolized, even though that person may in fact have a perfectly normal structural brain CT or MRI scan. And so again, the ability to measure function provides invaluable clinical information that might be missed by just looking at a CT scan, which might appear to be perfectly normal. So the fact that Mr. Kirkland had a perfectly normal CT scan on a number of occasions does not mean that his brain is functioning normally. Just as it doesn't mean that a person is alive or dead, or a person is not in a coma or not. And so the only way to tell is to use a sugar metabolism scan in order to determine if his brain is functioning abnormally. And it's quite clear from the PET scan, when you do a statistical analysis using what we call an observer-independent map, that we have replicable significant differences in the PET scan findings, which are consistent with multiple traumatic brain injuries. He has a pattern with this decreased neocortical to cerebellar ratio. And so the neocortex is this part of the brain here. And the cerebellum is this part of the brain here. The cerebellum is involved with things like coordination and balance, and the neocortex is involved with almost everything else, like thinking and feeling and vision and hearing. And he has, his neocortex has less sugar being consumed compared to the cerebellum as compared to normal, which have a lot more sugar being consumed in the cortex compared to the cerebellum. And so this kind of pattern, this decrease in neocortex to cerebellar ratio, is a pattern that I have observed in individuals with multiple traumatic brain injuries. So, for example, I have been involved with looking at many NFL football players who have been part of this lawsuit against the NFL, saying that after multiple CTE is short for chronic traumatic encephalopathy. When you have multiple brain injuries, this causes the neocortex to burn less sugar than it should compared to the cerebellum. The cerebellum is a more robust part of the brain, which is more resilient and less sensitive to head trauma, whereas the neocortex is a more sophisticated but more delicate part of the brain.
Okay, when we talk about sugar metabolism, are you referring to the FDG?
Yes, the FDG, which is fluorodeoxyglucose. Glucose is a kind of sugar.
Okay, it's a sugar or glucose analog.
Yes,
And it's injected into the patient,
yes.
and you determine from that where the sugar is metabolized, or the glucose.
Yes.
And what does that tell you?
And so in Mr. Kirkland's case, one of the things that I noted is that he has this decreased neocortical to cerebellar ratio, very similar to the pattern I have observed in individuals who are suspected to have CTE, like NFL football players or other people with multiple head traumas. And CTE is a very significant condition in which an individual who sustained multiple head traumas starts to develop over time at a period distant from the initial insults, in some cases 10, 20 years after initial insults, significant breakdown in behavioral regulation, including the ability to regulate impulses. And so, I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Concussion with Will Smith, where Will Smith portrays a true life...
Judge, Tim, I object to the, we're going to analyze a movie now.
Go ahead.
Where Will Smith plays a true life physician who noted that CTE findings were present in an NFL football player who had committed suicide. And there was tremendous pushback from the NFL, and they tried
Objection to any discussion about the NFL and their pushback as it pertains to this case.
Go ahead.
And they tried to get him to retract his paper. The movie's about his heroic stand to stand his ground, and other doctors replicated his findings that CTE was in fact found. And there has been a recent article published in the New York Times that shows out of 110 football players who have donated their brains to science, 109 out of 110 have the pathological hallmarks of CTE. And many of these individuals had significant breakdown in impulse regulation, including significant impairment in their ability to regulate either other directed aggression or self-directed aggression. So, for example, Junior Seau was
Objection to any comments about Junior Seau.
Was a San Diego football player who had significant behavioral problems. He ended up committing suicide. He shot himself in the chest so that his brain would be preserved for science. It turned out he had significant CTE. Aaron Hernandez.
Objection to any comment, testimony about Aaron Hernandez.
Is a New England quarterback who committed a murder of a friend for no good reason and ended up committing suicide in jail. He had, I think, like a $40 million a year contract. And when they did an autopsy of his brain, he had one of the worst cases of CTE anyone had ever seen. And so you have many cases of people with CTE who, years after the injury, like have these significant breakdown in impulse regulation, especially aggression. And so Mr. Kirkland has this kind of pattern that I have observed in many other people who are suspected of having CTE.
I'd like to get back to the PET scan. You take the information that you get from the PET scan and you feed it into a computer?
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes.
And what is the result of that?
Well, we have a Z-map which is generated, and the Z-map, let's see, I don't know if, I think we have, this is Z-map of the DTI. Let's see, I don't know if, here. I have it here on a PowerPoint.
Here are all the exhibits from the...
Okay. And so on exhibit 3D and 3E, we generate a Z-map which shows all these black spots. These black spots are areas that are statistically abnormal with a P.01 and 30 contiguous voxel cluster threshold. And so we're seeing multiple areas of these black spots in Mr. Kirkland. And so what I've done in addendum 2, so this is in addendum 1 of my report. This is, and anyone who uses my normal controls and runs the same statistical threshold, P01 with 30 contiguous clusters with the age and gender covariate regression, is going to get the exact same test. And then what I did in addendum 2 was that I actually measured the metabolism in Mr. Kirkland and measured them in my normative control group. And so, for example, in the right frontal lobe area, normal controls have a metabolic rate of 1.56. Mr. Kirkland had a metabolic rate of 0.94. The standard deviation is 0.11. And so we generate something called a Z-score. And the way a Z-score works is that you take the average, you subtract the patient's value from the average, and then you divide by the standard deviation to get the Z-scores. And so the best way of thinking about this is, again, with using height as an example. Like if the average American, a 30-year-old male, is 5 feet 10 inches, and the standard deviation is 3 inches, you can calculate how many standard deviations different someone is. And so, for example, if you look at like Will Chamberlain is 7 feet 1 inches. So you can take, and I actually ran this calculation here. Let's see. So Will Chamberlain is 7 feet 1 inches, and so if you count, so that is so 7 feet is 7 times 12 is 84 inches plus 1 is 85. The average male is 5 feet 10 inches, which is 70 inches. So 85 inches minus 70 inches is 15 inches, and the standard deviation is 3. So you divide 15 by 3, and Will Chamberlain is 5 standard deviations different from the norm. That means about 1 out of 3 million people are as high as Will Chamberlain, okay? Well, this is the kind of abnormality that we're seeing here in Mr. Kirkland. He is more than 5 standard deviations lower in the brain, and so he's kind of like the opposite of Will Chamberlain, except in the opposite direction in his brain. So the odds of this kind of abnormality occurring in the brain are like 1 in 3 million, or probably more 1 in 6 million. So this is in this case it's 4.8 times 10 to the minus 8, which is 10 to the minus 6 would be a million. 10 to the minus 8 would be 100 million. So this is 4.8 out of 100 million people would have an abnormally low value, this low. And so I did that with multiple other areas. Now,
okay, are you looking at what the computer produces? Are these slices that...
Well, these are slices of the brain, and then I'm looking at where the Z-map indicates that there are abnormalities.
Is this a slice of Mr. Kirkland's brain?
This is a slice of Mr. Kirkland's brain. Yes, I'm sorry. Okay, sorry. I know it's hard to Okay, and we can do the same thing in other areas of the brain. So, for example, in the right temporal lobe area here, we can see that the normal controls have a value of 1.48 in terms of their metabolism for this area. He has a value of 1.05. The standard deviation for this area is 0.07. So this is over 6 standard deviations lower in Mr. Kirkland than normal. This is like 1 out of 5 million people would have an abnormality this low. This is very abnormal in the normal population, but this is very common in a person who's had a traumatic brain injury. I see these kind of Z-scores and p-values all the time in people who sustain brain injuries. And so this is very consistent with his history of having been struck in the head multiple times as a child, especially when a child's brain is very delicate, or his having been in his industrial accident at 17, or his bicycle accident. And so I can't date exactly when this occurred, but I can say that he certainly had abnormalities consistent with those type of events. And so, he has multiple other abnormalities in the brain. So, for example, if we look here, this is the area of the brain where he's abnormally hot. And this is the area that's in the parahippocampal gyrus. And this is something that we see bilaterally. And so the normal controls have a value of 0.76. He has a value of 1.01. The standard deviation is 0.07. So 1.01 minus 0.76 is about 0.25 divided by 7 is roughly about 3.5 standard deviations above the norm. Or this is roughly, maybe 3 out of 10,000 people would have this value this high. Now, this kind of value is seen in individuals who have something called epilepsy spectrum disorder. Now, it's not uncommon after you've had traumatic brain injuries for people to develop something called epilepsy spectrum disorder. Now, epilepsy spectrum disorder doesn't mean that you necessarily have tonic-clonic motor activities, but it does mean that there are abnormal electrical firing in the brain areas that are damaged. And so this is very consistent with someone who has an epilepsy spectrum disorder, and it's very consistent with abnormal firing. And this is the area of the brain that's very important for emotional processing. And one of the things that happens with people with epilepsy spectrum disorder is that when they are stressed, they can't act out aggressively in a way that is hard for them to control. And judging from the accounts I've read of Mr. Kirkland, he had episodes when he acted out aggressively in ways that he seems to feel he was having trouble controlling himself. And so this would certainly be consistent with an epilepsy spectrum disorder where the brain is firing and discharging and triggering emotional circuits in the brain that an individual is not capable of controlling.
Are these colors produced by the computer?
Well, these colors are color-coded to sugar metabolism. So areas of the brain that are higher in sugar metabolism are going to be color-coded hotter colors like red, and areas of the brain that are lower in sugar metabolism are going to be colored cooler colors like blue. And so there's what we call a rainbow spectrum: red, yellow, orange, green, violet, blue. And so depending upon how much sugar is being consumed in different parts of the brain, it will determine what color that part of the brain is colored.
Would anybody using the same test be able to replicate this?
Yes, if anyone were to pull up Mr. Kirkland scan and they were to do the same kind of SPM analysis I did, using the same parameters and the same normative controls, with the same, they will get the exact same results. I've done this, and you will get the exact same results when you rerun this test, and if you do this test correctly.
I'd like to show you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 1. In the top of the page, it says SYNCOPE. Can you tell us what that is?
let's see, the top of the page, let's see, oh, which part here? Oh, syncope. Syncope. Syncope means fainting, blacking out.
Okay, and does this report note remote left medial orbital wall fracture?
Yes, this indicates that there was an old left medial orbital wall fracture. So this would have been 5 years after the 2004 bicycle accident, and so this is very consistent with a fracture of the zygoma from the 2004 accident.
Now, no one can say if you have CTE when it's going to affect you or what's going to happen.
That's correct. The exact timeline is going to vary from individual to individual, but it's interesting to note that here they indicate that he has possible seizure disorders, and this is very consistent with his PET scan finding of this abnormal increase in the parahippocampus.
It says on the syncope head injury next to it.
Yes, head injury now is possible seizures. And so what we're seeing here is objective evidence of a seizure spectrum disorder. This abnormal activation in the parahippocampus is what we see in people with seizure spectrum disorders.
I'd like you to look at what's been marked for identification as defendant's exhibits 3N1 and 3N2. What test did this come from?
So these are the DTI scans that we analyze using what we call a statistical parametric map of quantitative analysis, the kind that Ohio State says they do not do, but which can be done clinically. There are clinical guidelines for doing these kind of tests published by the American Society of Functional Neuroradiology, and it is an accepted clinical tool for DTI assessment, although the Ohio physicians did not choose, the Ohio physicians were either not aware of this or choose not to do this for whatever reason. But what we see here are these red regions here. These red regions are areas that are statistically abnormal. In this case, these are areas of the red region that are statistically abnormal with a p equal to 0.01 with a 30 voxel extent threshold. That means you have to have at least 30 or more voxels, all with a p less than 0.01 to be flagged as abnormal and colored red.
What's a p?
Well, p value is a probability value. It's a 1 chance in 100 of a particular voxel being that low by chance alone. But when you have 30 of them, all right next to each other, having that 1 out of 100 chance, then this is not just a random noise. This likely represents some significant pathology. In this case, a significant decrease in the fractional anisotropy, which is a measure of DTI in Mr. Kirkland. And what we're seeing here is that we're seeing a significant decrease in the right posterior internal capsule. And so the average FA value in this area is 0.48. His value is 0.33. So that's about, and the standard deviation is about 0.04. And so this is about 4 standard deviations below the norm, or about 6 out of 10,000 people would have this by chance alone. The typical medical threshold for being significant is 5 out of 100. And so this is very consistent with some kind of right-sided head trauma at some point in time.
Doctor, so other than the visual analysis, is that where you start from there and where the radiologist has stopped?
Yes. So I do the visual analysis also, but then I add a statistical and quantifiable numerical approach, which I believe is absolutely essential when you're trying to get the most accurate assessment of a scan, and which is something that was not done by Ohio.
In fact, they commented in the report that they generally don't do those tests.
Yes. And so
These are tests that are recognized in clinical use?
yes, and ZMAP approach for DTI there are clinical guidelines for its use published by the American Functional Society of Neuroradiology, and it is being used by clinicians who are knowledgeable and up to date about how to use these kind of methods in the assessment of DTI.
And when the information's fed into a computer, what software do you use?
Well, I use a software called SPM. This is a widely available software. Anyone can download software and run it, and it's used in thousands of medical imaging articles. It's probably the most widely used medical imaging analysis software in the literature.
And Mama, please. And you've been questioned here by Mr. Gibson. Is there any opinion that you changed from your first deposition back in November?
No, I haven't changed any of my opinions.
And are your opinions to a reasonable degree of medical certainty?
Yes.
And as a result of your testing, you're picking up where the radiologist stopped. Do you feel that Mr. Kirkland has significant CTE or?
He has a pattern very consistent with other individuals who've had sustained multiple traumatic brain injuries and who are at high risk for CTE. Now, CTE is currently definitively made only upon autopsy, but people who have suspected history of likely CTE have the kind of pattern that I have observed in Mr. Kirkland, of this decreased neocortical cerebellar ratio. And it's very consistent with his history of multiple beatings when he was a child, the industrial accident at 17, the bicycle accident was just a facial fracture, and then significant behavior change that was noted by Roberta after the bicycle accident. And so the evidence is quite pronounced. If you look at the quantitative volumetric data too, I mean, he shows a enlarged left lateral ventricle. So that means the left lateral ventricle, the ventricle is a part of the brain that would be in this area here. It's a kind of a fluid-filled cavity, and that fluid-filled cavity gets larger if that side of the brain is damaged because the brain has shrunk on that side. And so his left lateral ventricle is statistically significantly enlarged. And so this is consistent with some type of old left brain injury that caused enlargement of the left lateral ventricle. And then he also shows significant abnormalities in the right thalamus. So his right thalamus is much smaller than normal. And again, this is consistent with someone who sustained a significant right-sided brain injury sometime. So because you're not going to get a shrunken right thalamus and a large left lateral ventricle in the same accident. These have to be at least two distinctly different injuries to get a left lateral ventricular enlargement and then a right thalamic atrophy. The other thing that's remarkable about his quantitative volumetric is that he has an abnormally enlarged amygdala. Now, an abnormally enlarged amygdala has been reported in individuals with severe emotional neglect. Like in Romania,
objection to the Romanian study or whatever it is.
In Romania, there were abortions were prohibited, so many Romanian families had many more kids than they could handle. These kids were placed in Romanian orphanages where they had minimal care. I mean, they were basically fed, but they had no emotional nurturance. And these kids grew up with severe behavioral problems. And American parents were trying to adopt these Romanian kids, found out that they were in for a handful. And And one of the things that was noted is that these kids have enlarged amygdala. And Mr. Kirkland has an enlarged amygdala, very consistent with the kind of amygdala enlargement seen in severely neglected Romanian orphans. And it's very consistent with the kind of history that he reports, where his mother was described as being very distant, his father was very physically abusive, and so he has a structural abnormality in the amygdala. The amygdala is a part of the brain that processes fear and emotion. And his amygdala is about 30% larger than normal, and it's a significant enlargement. Now what's interesting is that the Romanian orphanage studies found that the amygdala enlargement was bilateral, that is, both sides of the brain were enlarged. Now he only shows a one-sided enlargement of the amygdala. Now this is, in my opinion, consistent with his probably having initially a bilaterally enlarged amygdala of right and left side, but due to some trauma on the brain, we know that trauma causes shrinkage. And so the trauma probably caused, in my opinion, the abnormal enlarged left amygdala to activate down to normal size, which is why the left amygdala is no longer significantly enlarged. In my medical opinion, there's no other explanation for why his right side of the amygdala is so enlarged, but his left side is normal, other than the fact that he probably had a bilaterally enlarged amygdala due to severe emotional neglect, and the left side of the amygdala shrunk down to normal after it was some type of a head trauma. And
based upon your findings, would you expect Mr. Kirkland to have difficulty controlling his behavior?
Yes, I would say that we know that from medical studies that individuals who grow up with severe neglect and abuse, but they have a normal brain, are more likely to survive emotionally unscathed and are able to grow up in later life. But we know that if you grow up with severe abuse and neglect and your brain is injured or damaged, you're much less likely to be able to have a normal life. You're much more likely to act out aggressively because the damaged brain is not able to learn how to cope with the severe emotional neglect and abuse. And so what I've seen in Mr. Kirkland is that he has clear evidence of multiple different types of damages, from the enlarged left ventricle to the shrunken right thalamic volume, to the significant asymmetry in the amygdala volumes, to the abnormalities on the DTI for the right corpus callosum tractography, to the abnormalities on the DTI-Z map with a decrease in the FA, to the PET scan abnormalities with this decreased neocortical to cerebellar ratio. I mean, he has findings in spades of multiple causes of brain injury, and he also has findings in spades of having grown up in a severely neglectful, severely abusive environment. And so it is not surprising to me that he is going to have significant difficulty regulating impulses. And it seemed like, in particular, the 2004 bicycle accident with the right-sided facial fracture on the zygoma, which shows up as remote facial fracture in 2009 X-ray, in which he has possible seizures, and is the one where Roberta noted that he had a significant change from being a church-going, job-holding, nice guy with her and taking care of her kids, helping her to pay her bills, to someone who becomes homeless, who is no longer welcome at the church, who ends up threatening his son, I mean, it's clear that this, in my medical opinion, this 2004 accident took someone, this 2004 accident on top of all the other situations that he had, with all the physical beatings, with the industrial accident when he was 17, pushed him over the edge, in my opinion, in terms of his ability to regulate his impulses.
Thank you. I have nothing further.
Doctor, I just have one area I want to
talk about, and maybe it's obvious, when you received the scans from the Ohio State University, they were done in a grayscale, is that correct? They did not have the bold, vibrant colors that we see in these later photos you identified with Mr. Kutcher, is that correct?
The data is provided to me in a numerical format. The data has no color, gray or rainbow. It's numerical. And so the manner in which it's displayed depends upon how you choose to display the numerical data. And so the data is inherently color neutral mathematically.
And but you added the color to those scans that you showed us for use in your comparison process, is that correct?
I use both a grayscale and a rainbow scale, which is a customary approach by many physicians who read PET scans, who utilize both the grayscale and the color scale. So, but it is something that I took the mathematical data that describes metabolism and used a rainbow scale and a grayscale color lookup table to display that mathematical information. But this is commonly done by many physicians in this field.
I'm just asking if you added the color, that was you that did that on the scans that you showed us.
I use what we call a, I use what we call a color lookup table, which converts the mathematical values of the glucose metabolism into the corresponding colors.
That's what I wanted to know. Thank you. I don't have any further questions.
Nothing to
Here marks the end of today's videotape deposition of Dr. Joseph Wu. Going off the record, the time is 3 p.m.
And so if
That's it. Okay, thank you. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I know we had a discussion at this point. I believe the state's going to call a witness. Is that correct?
Yes, David with their next witness was not going to be available today. So we indicated it's okay. I think both sides agreed we would call some of our witnesses ahead of that person.
That's absolutely correct. There's no objection to that procedure. That's for the convenience of both sides. Thank you.
All right, thank you both very much. I'm sure you all heard just what went on there in order to try to keep it moving for you, and quite frankly, arranging schedules and all those other things. Counsel, and I appreciate their cooperation, professionalism. They've indicated they're going to kind of call a witness now out of order, okay? Whoever calls the witnesses, you still use the test that you're going to be told about to judge credibility, so it's all part of the same thing in a way. With that, though, I need to check. Is everybody okay? Okay. And I don't know offhand. Oh, good. You're more than welcome to stretch. To absolutely do that. How long? That's fine. Okay. Okay. I mean, it's fine. No, that's all right. We'll do the hour. That's fine. What we're going to do, quite frankly, ladies and gentlemen, to accommodate me, I did not ask for a whole lot, but there's a very good friend of my family whose funeral is at 1 o'clock, and I asked them if there's any way we could work around that, and everybody was very cooperative with me. So if you guys can hang in for an hour, we'll call it a day at about quarter till 1, okay, and then come back tomorrow. Everybody okay with that?
How about this? How if we play the deposition of Dr. Wright? It's 37 minutes. That way, Chris can get the transcripts passed out. You can explain again that there are objections that are, I don't think there are any objections on that at all. So we'll just play it right through.
Just real quick then, tomorrow then, will we have something for the jury?
Absolutely. We have a live witness, stage witness, rebuttal witness, and then the other one that we're not going to call today.
Okay, all right. And I think, and maybe this will help. Don't hold me to this, okay? But I think we can get this case to you if everything breaks the way it's supposed to, as far as the everything that you need to hear, and then to begin your deliberations would be on Monday. Okay, so first of all, you don't have to worry about the weekend. You're not going to, we talked about sequestration. We'll talk to you again about that. That's not going to happen over the weekend. first time that would occur is on Monday. So hopefully that helps a little bit. We'll try then, if you don't mind, we'll do the 37-minute one today. We'll have some things for you tomorrow, and then we'll wrap up the evidence on Friday. Okay, everybody okay? We're a little out of order here, but you need to know that, okay? Is that okay with everybody then? Just keep going. Okay, I do appreciate that, and I think Gino Trotta would appreciate that, the guy running the business.
The next witness, Chadwick, Wright. That's the one we're at.
While he's doing that, ladies and gentlemen, again, you're about to hear a videotape deposition. By agreement of the parties, each of you will be provided a written transcript of the testimony to assist you. Should you find any discrepancy between what you thought you heard versus what you see in writing, the audio controls, you will decide based on the audio. Did you get... No, Andy went to lunch.
Let's pass all Dr. Cruz.
Yeah, I was going to say, get those. You go and help him real quick. Chris, you got a helper here. Just give him the Dr. Woos. He was just recruited. He's just watching, but he needs to do something, so he's going to help a little bit. Do you want him to get those, Chris? Thank you. Thank you. One thing, the typing's a little bigger for everybody. So. All right. With that, I think we're all set. Mrs. Schreier, again, thank you for your help whenever you're ready.
Today is June 11th, 2018. Time is 11:32 a.m. on the record. All right, it is June the 11th, 2018. The time is approximately 11:31 a.m. We're here at the Ohio State University Wexner Medical Center in Columbus, Ohio. We're here by agreement of counsel and on order of the court to take the deposition of Dr. Chadwick Wright. Dr. Wright's a witness for the state in the case of State of Ohio versus Anthony Kirkland, and his name has been provided in discovery in that case, which number is B0901629. Also, defense counsel has been provided with Dr. Wright's curriculum vitae and a report of an exam that he did on Anthony Kirkland back in October of 2017 at this facility at the request of Dr. Wu. The purpose of the deposition here today is to perpetuate Dr. Wright's testimony so that it can be used at trial, given his busy schedule here at the Ohio State University Wexner Medical Center. In addition to Dr. Wright, I want to indicate who's present as far as parties in the case. Here, Rick Gibson, Chief Assistant Prosecutor in Hamilton County. Rich Wendell and Tim Kutcher are here representing the defendant, Anthony Kirkland. We have a videographer and a stenographer to take all this down. And we have representatives here of the Wexner Medical Center present as well. The defendant, Anthony Kirkland, is specifically not present, having waived his right to be at this deposition. Anything you want to add, Tim, or anything like that?
No, nothing to add.
Everything okay?
Yes.
All right. If we could have Dr. Wright sworn then, we'll begin his deposition.
His presence.
Yeah. We have Dr. Wright sworn. I do. Good morning, Dr. Wright.
Good morning.
If you would, state your name and spell your last name so we had it correct in the record, please.
Chadwick Lewis Wright. Last name is spelled W-R-I-G-H-T.
And how are you employed, sir?
I am employed as a radiologist and nuclear medicine physician here at The Ohio State University.
All right. You live in the Columbus area as well?
I do.
All right. Could you tell us a little bit about your educational background that enables you to work here in the radiology department?
So I attended medical school here at The Ohio State University. I then graduated medical school. I did an internship at Riverside Methodist Hospital. I then transitioned from my internship to a diagnostic radiology residency, which was also here at The Ohio State University. At that point, I then pursued a fellowship in nuclear medicine at Washington University, the Mallinckrodt Institute of Radiology in St. Louis, Missouri. And upon completion of that, I became employed as an attending faculty member here at The Ohio State University in August of 2012.
Okay, so you've been here about almost 6 years now.
Almost 6 years.
You are a physician licensed to practice medicine in the state of Ohio?
Yes.
And are you board certified in any specialized fields of medicine?
I'm board certified in both radiology and nuclear medicine, so by the American Board of Radiology and the American Board of Nuclear Medicine.
All right. And what are your duties here at The Ohio State University? What types of procedures do you perform?
So my clinical obligations are specifically in nuclear medicine, so that would include PET imaging, PET CT imaging, general nuclear medicine, nuclear cardiology, and radionuclide therapy. So that would be my clinical obligations, and I also am involved with research as well.
All right. Can you tell us a little bit about the PET nuclear brain scan and what that is? And is that one of the procedures you perform, or at least review?
It is. So it's going to be a fluorodeoxyglucose or an FDG PET CT brain scan. And so that is a clinical scan that we do perform here for indications of neurodegeneration, epilepsy, disorders like that.
So primarily looking for example, dementia, onset of dementia?
Predominantly the scans that we do here would be looking for dementia.
That would be your typical patient?
That would be the typical dedicated brain FDG PET patient.
Can you tell us how you go about performing that exam and what you're looking for?
So the scan itself it takes place after the patient's been previously injected with the radioactive form of sugar. The patient is sitting usually, it's according to protocol, in a quiet, darkened room. They are injected with the radioactive isotope, which is, again, a radioactive form of glucose.
Can I stop you just a second? Is that called a resting protocol when you have them relaxed and quiet?
Yes. So it is a resting protocol. That is the only protocol that we perform here for dedicated brain FDG PET imaging.
Okay, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
It's okay.
All right, and so what you're measuring is how the brain is functioning by using the glucose, synthesizing or metabolizing the glucose?
Yes, so we are looking at the brain's utilization of glucose with this scan. So we're imaging the entire brain, and we're looking at the areas of the brain that take up the glucose tracer that we injected under the resting state.
How many of these PET scans, brain scans, have you performed in the time you've been a physician?
I would say probably 1% to 2% of my PET workload would be a dedicated brain. In terms of a number, it would be hard for me to tell you a precise number. I would say in the range of probably 50 to 100.
All right. And you do other PET scans, but you're talking when that number is about the brain scans.
Yes, I'm specifically talking about just the dedicated brain resting scans. Yes, we do between 20 to 25 whole body scans a day, which do include the brain, but those are typically done for cancer imaging purposes.
All right. And so you do this on a daily basis, perform this kind of examination?
When I'm on clinical service, yes. If I am on the PET service, I am reading these PET scans.
All right. Now, when you do a PET scan, when it's completed, do you review that scan and try to make findings?
Yes. Right. So on the day the PET scan is performed, review the images that were obtained from that PET scan, review any relevant medical records, and then dictate a report of the findings and my impression.
All right. At this time, I would tender Dr. Wright as an expert in this field, unless there's some further question you want to ask relating to his qualifications?
No, I'll stipulate.
All right. Thank you. Dr. Wright, on October the 6th, 2017, were you working here at the Ohio State University Wexner Medical Center?
Yes.
And did he have a patient that came in by the name of Anthony Kirkland that was going to receive a PET brain scan?
As far as I can recall, yes.
Okay. And do you know how he came to be there for that scan?
Now, in retrospect, I mean, at the time I was reading the scan, I had no idea what was, the preceding history for the patient arriving.
How does a patient normally come to you?
For review?
Yes, sir.
To interpret. So there are patients who are scheduled for that day, and I typically do not see any of the patients while they're being prepared, injected, while they await for their imaging. I will only actually look at their images after the scan is complete and they've been sent to a dedicated workstation, which is in a different part of the hospital.
All right. You have technicians that do all the administering of the test.
The technologists work with the patient to administer the radioactive form of sugar and to perform the imaging.
Did you know that Anthony Kirkland was an inmate in the Department of Corrections and he'd been brought here for that test from the Department of Corrections?
I don't recall that information.
Okay, but that wouldn't be unusual, would it? You have a contract with the state if an inmate needs
Correct.
A procedure, they're brought here frequently?
Yes, we do have a contract to image patients for the state for corrections.
And if I asked you, did you know Anthony Kirkland? Did you know of him?
Not prior to this.
Okay, okay. Do you know who the physician was that wrote the order for the PET scan for Anthony Kirkland?
I'd have to look at the...
Yeah, if you could, and I think...
looks like it was Dr. Joseph Wu. Yes, Dr. Joseph Wu.
All right. And did you know Dr. Wu, or did you know of Dr. Wu?
No.
Okay. Did he provide you with any specific instructions that he would like you to follow or have followed in the administration of this PET scan?
Not that I see here in the order.
Okay, I think in particular it would be on or around page 4.
Okay, so it looks like the only information provided is a diagnosis of others specified intracranial injury with loss of consciousness of 30 minutes or less, sequela.
Okay, so he's indicating that Anthony Kirkland had a head injury?
Correct, an intracranial injury.
Is that, did you presume at that point you're looking for some kind of brain injury?
That or any other possible finding. Yeah.
Did Dr. Wu give you any more specific history as to what kind of a head injury, how or when it was sustained or anything like that?
There was no communication with Dr. Wu by myself.
Okay, you didn't talk to him or he didn't call you and ask you?
I did not.
In case you're not familiar with downtown, it's a test. As far as I know, it's a test, so don't worry about it. First Wednesday. that's it. Okay.
I called him and he did not call me.
Did Dr. Wu provide or indicate to you that Anthony Kirkland had had some previous brain scans, an MRI done? And if so, would you have wanted to see that, if possible?
So your first question, no, there was no information shared with me by Dr. Wu about this particular patient's case. Yes, any prior imaging or any prior history would have been useful at the time of interpretation.
If the doctor that referred this case or wrote the order for this case knew about it, it would have been helpful information for you to have.
Of course.
Okay. But you didn't have anything like that in this case?
Not at that time.
And in fact, in your report, you have a listing on your report when it's completed for comparisons, do you not?
Yes.
In this one, you had no comparisons to look at with
Correct.
the scan you had?
Correct.
Okay, okay. So Kirkland came in for this brain scan on October 6th. Did he have the PET brain scan?
The resting PET brain scan, yes.
And were there any complications in that scan that you can recall?
None that I recall.
Okay. So the scan was completed. How long would it have taken to complete?
The scan itself probably, well, from the time he was injected to the time he was finished imaging, it probably would have taken less than 90 minutes.
Okay, okay. And then when it was completed, then you would have reviewed the scan, is that correct?
Correct.
All right. And you would have dictated a report, I think you said earlier?
Yes.
I think in the records in front of you, that marked States Exhibit 3, if you look at page 4 and 5, does that note the report that you dictated with regard to the PET brain scan of Anthony Kirkland?
Yes.
All right. Can you look at the findings?
Yes.
And read findings and answer, are those the findings that you made in this case?
Would you like me to read this?
Yes, please.
Okay. So the findings are, there is no suspicious focus of abnormally increased or decreased FDG uptake identified within the cerebral or cerebellar hemispheres, period. On the non-contrast enhanced CT images, there are non-specific calcifications noted within the basal ganglia, period.
All right. And can you tell us in layman's terms, what are you saying there? What do those things mean in terms that a lay juror could understand?
So essentially I saw no abnormality where there was unusually or abnormally increased glucose utilization by the brain or abnormally decreased utilization of glucose by the brain. So essentially this is from a PET standpoint, a normal appearing scan.
So that it's telling you that the brain is functioning properly?
To the best of my ability, yes.
Okay. And did you see any indication or evidence of any traumatic brain injury in the PET scan that you performed? Anything that would indicate to you that he was suffering from some traumatic brain injury?
I did not.
All right. Would you consider this a normal PET brain scan?
Yes.
All right. Did you do any kind of further analysis with regard to this, or were you finished at that point?
I performed a visual assessment, and that's the basis for my report. That's all I did.
Okay. Now, when this was completed, would a copy of the report and a copy of the scan itself have been sent to Anthony Kirkland's referring physician?
At least a copy of the report. I honestly don't know if there were instructions prior to this for a copy of the scan to be sent as well.
Okay. Nobody called you and had some follow-up questions about it or anything like that?
No one spoke with me to specifically request a copy of the report or the images.
All right. Are you familiar with Dr. Alan Waxman?
By reputation only.
Okay. And is he the head of the nuclear and radiology division at Cedars-Sinai Hospital in Los Angeles?
To the best of my knowledge.
You indicate you do know of his reputation in your field?
I do. I do not know Dr. Waxman personally, but I'm clearly aware of him professionally.
What is the professional reputation that Dr. Waxman has?
Oh, he's a very, very good nuclear medicine physician.
All right. Well respected.
Very well
his
respected.
peers?
Yes.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Wright. That's all the questions that I have.
Good morning, Dr. Wright.
Good morning.
I'm Tim Kutcher. I'm here with Rich Wendell. We represent Anthony Kirkland. Anthony Kirkland came to you to have a PET scan performed, is that right?
Yes.
Okay. And PET stands for positron emission tomography, is that correct?
That is correct.
And could you describe how this test is performed?
In terms of Mr. Kirkland,
Mr. Kirkland is hooked up to an IV. He gets a shot of fluorodeoxyglucose.
Correct. Yes.
Which is
the
tracer.
Which is the positron emitting radiotracer that we would use for this study.
Okay. And a positron is a positively charged electron, isn't it?
It is.
And it somehow
it's a positively charged particle. It's an anti-electron, but yes.
Okay. It produces antimatter.
It will interact with an electron and annihilate to produce two photons, or two essentially rays of radiation of a very specific energy level that can then be detected by the PET scanner.
Okay. Those two gamma photons are approximately 180 degrees.
At the time of annihilation, yes.
Right. And then that registers and is read by the PET scan.
It's detected by the PET scanner.
Okay. And what does it produce? Does it produce images? The PET scan.
The PET scan. So it provides, yes. So you would use that information to then get images that have been reconstructed from the data that were acquired during the scan.
And this data is acquired by a computer?
The scanner, but there is a computer associated with it.
Okay. And the FDG accumulates where the glucose is metabolized by positron emission.
I want to make sure I understand your question. I'm sorry. The FDG accumulates
where glucose is metabolized.
If you stop there, yes, it will accumulate in cells that are taking up glucose for the purposes of metabolism, glucose metabolism. And the last part, I wasn't quite sure.
You're trying to find what? What are you trying to find?
With glucose?
With the test.
With the test. So we're essentially looking for areas of abnormally increased or decreased glucose utilization in the tissue of interest.
The prosecutor specifically asked you if this was an at-rest test, and I believe your answer was that all tests that you run are at rest.
Correct. Our protocols for a resting protocol.
Okay. You're aware that there are other protocols?
Up until this point, I was not aware that there were other protocols being utilized clinically.
And I believe you said you've done approximately 100 of these?
Probably.
That'd be in your entire career?
That would probably be since being an attending physician here at Ohio State.
Okay. And specifically, the typical patient is you're detecting a neurodegenerative condition?
So the indications most typically for a scan, a dedicated resting FDG PET brain, would be for Ohio State neurodegeneration, dementia.
Dementia, Alzheimer's?
Correct.
Any others?
Sometimes for seizure localization.
Is there, is a differential diagnosis sometimes looking for cancer?
For a neurodegeneration request, or we do FDG PET CT scans for cancer imaging most frequently.
Okay.
So yes, there could be an incidental cancer found on a scan.
Those are some of the uses?
For FDG PET?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Now, I think you explained that when the test is actually performed, it's performed by technicians.
Yes.
You're not in the room.
I'm not in the patient preparation area or in the scanner room.
You don't see the patient?
Not typically.
What you see is the result of the test done by the technologist, which is sent to a workstation in a building?
In at least a different part of the building, in a different room.
Okay. And you're looking at what the computer has created an image for you?
Correct. So we use our standard protocol to reconstruct those images, and then those would be what I would review for the purposes of a standard of care clinical report.
So would you know who Amy Dodds is?
She was a PET scheduler.
Okay. And
meaning that she would...
It says electronically signed by Amy Dodds. That'd be typical.
She was a scheduling person here that would schedule PET scans.
Okay. You say you know Dr. Waxman by
reputation.
And how do you know him? By reputation?
From
medical textbooks?
I would say predominantly from hearing him speak at professional meetings.
Okay. So you've attended meetings where he's been a speaker?
Yes.
Now, you said it would have been helpful if you would have had any prior scans, if available. When the patient is referred to you, is that a request you can make?
I don't know if that is a request that is routinely offered at the time of scheduling. And no one had asked me prior to the images arriving if I would like to have images available from a prior study. But if I had been asked, I would have said yes.
Okay. Would it have occurred to you without any information to say, are there prior records?
Without the scans?
Patients referred to you?
Correct.
Okay. Wouldn't as a physician you normally take a history if you were seeing the patient?
Yes.
Okay. Would a history be taken by somebody when a patient arrives on campus?
Typically, yes.
Okay. And wouldn't that include whether or not there had been prior scans?
So I believe that they would have typically asked if they had had prior workup, but I'm not sure they would have specifically asked for prior scans.
Okay. Would you expect the PET scan to reveal an orbital fracture?
It's possible, but it wouldn't have been on the PET scan unless it was acute.
Okay. If it was remote?
If it was remote, meaning remote trauma, the PET findings may not have indicated any abnormality.
Okay, are there more sensitive tests than PET?
For trying to determine a remote fracture?
Yes.
Of course. You could anatomic imaging.
Okay. I'd like to show you what's been marked for identification as State's Exhibit, Depot Number 1 exhibit. Ask you if you can, I know you haven't seen that before. Does it appear to be referring to Mr. Kirkland?
His name is listed.
Does it further indicate a remote fracture?
Yes, there are brackets around the sentence. A remote left medial orbital wall fracture is seen.
When you do your analysis of the information created by the computer, you do what's first called a visual analysis, is that correct?
So for my PET scan?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Is there any other kind of analysis you routinely do?
A visual assessment is the assessment that I performed. In terms of, I guess I would need a better understanding of additional analysis.
Would you do any kind of statistical analysis?
No.
Are you aware of any statistical analyses protocols that exist?
I would say that there are statistical protocols that probably are available for research purposes. I'm not aware of any FDA-approved, let's say, software packages for statistical analysis for routine clinical use in PET scans.
So in this routine clinical use, you found what you've determined was a normal PET scan
Of the brain.
of the brain.
Yes.
Does that mean that there couldn't have been a traumatic brain injury?
I wouldn't be able to tell you if there had been prior injury.
All you can say is right now there's no evidence of a brain injury.
At the time of the scan, there was no PET evidence for me to conclude that there had been prior brain injury.
Now, prior to your appearing here today, it was requested by the defense to be able to speak to you, and you declined that, is that correct?
That is correct.
And what was the basis of your declination?
It was just a very busy time, and I did not really want to get any more involved in the case than necessary.
And that was after you had spoken to the prosecutor already?
Yes.
May we go off the record for a moment, please?
It's 12:02 p.m. Time is 12:03 p.m. We're back on the record.
Would you recognize what you do as a rapidly evolving area of medicine?
Specifically nuclear medicine?
Nuclear medicine, molecular imaging.
I would say that yes, all medical imaging, including nuclear medicine and molecular imaging, is, yes, rapidly evolving.
Okay. And have you had occasion to review any peer-reviewed articles regarding molecular imaging?
Yes.
Okay. And in those articles, do they talk about statistical analysis?
Yes.
Okay. but here at Ohio State, you said you do research. You are not doing any statistical analysis?
In research?
Yes.
Yes, I would say that in research, for research purposes, often there is statistical analysis that is necessary to be performed.
Are you doing any of that?
Yes.
Okay. How much of your time is spent researching statistical analysis?
Oh. So I do 50% of my time is research. Of that, a very small fraction, probably less than 1% of my time is spent actually applying statistics to the research that I do.
Okay. Would you agree or disagree that a PET scan is an appropriate tool for diagnosing brain injuries?
I would say that given a certain type of brain injury, it can be sensitive for the detection of brain injury, but it really depends on the mechanism of brain injury.
Finally, I see that you found non-specific calcification noted within the basal ganglia. What does that mean?
There were small calcifications in the region of the basal ganglia on the CT portion of the PET-CT study.
Okay. For jury purposes,
Of course.
where's the basal ganglia?
The basal ganglia is in the mid portion of the brain, and it's just to the right and to the left of the midline.
Clinically, do you expect PET scans to evolve so that it is more of a diagnostic tool?
So it's already a diagnostic tool.
If it's not, I don't want you to assume anything.
Okay.
Do you believe it to be a diagnostic tool?
Do I believe that FDG PET scans? Yes, they are a diagnostic tool for the diagnosis of cancer. They can certainly help in the diagnosis of seizure foci, dementia.
Okay, but not for brain injury.
I think that it would be possible in the future that PET can be used to try and characterize brain injury.
All right. In fact, that's what researchers are doing now, isn't it?
I believe so, yes.
All right. No further questions.
I don't have any questions on redirect. Dr. Wright, this is going to conclude your deposition here today. Before we go off the record, though, let me indicate that we have a video that will play a trial of your testimony, and we also have a court stenographer that's taking this all down, and she'll make a transcript. Normally, you would have the opportunity to see that before it's filed, that transcript, to read over it, to make any corrections you felt need to be made, and to sign the end of it. Inasmuch as we have a trial date, a deadline, so to speak, and we do have a video, if you wish to do so, you can waive signature on that, and the court reporter will simply type the transcript and file it. What would you prefer in this case?
Can I ask my lady?
Sure.
I recommend going with this.
Okay. I will go ahead and read it then.
All right.
There's no fee associated with that, correct?
I wouldn't think so. No. Oh, what is it? I'm sorry. No. Okay.
Just making sure I've seen it.
Yeah. All right. So the court reporter will get your testimony transcribed. She will send it up for you to review. There will be a corrections page if you think something is noted wrong in the transcript than what you actually said. You can make any corrections you feel appropriate, and then you signed it. sign it, and send it back. Okay? All right, excellent. Anything else? Yeah. Anything else? Okay.
Time is 12:09 p.m. This concludes the deposition.
Thanks, Dr. Wright. I appreciate it.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Cryer. Ladies and gentlemen, that's going to take care of it for the day. Give you a little chance to get off early, and I appreciate the opportunity to go do what I need to do. It's very nice of everyone. We'll come back tomorrow, 9:30, get here around 9:20 or so, like you've been doing very, very well. We'll try to get going at 9:30. Doesn't look like it'll be a real long day tomorrow, but we'll go as far as we need to go. And then I believe, again, we can finish up the evidence on Friday and then get this case to you on Monday. Remember all the admonitions. Do not discuss this case among yourselves. Do not permit anyone to discuss it with you or in your presence. And it is your duty to not form or express any opinion on this case until it is all finally submitted to you. Please do not watch, view, read any media reports. You're doing great with that also. We'll see you back then tomorrow at 9:20 or so back in my jury room. Thank you all very much. Have a great day. Ladies and gentlemen, before we break for the day, counsel, how about, I know most of you are here bright and early. If we could maybe get together tomorrow at 9:15 on the record and go over the jury charge. I think it's being retyped. I've done some things on it to sort of change some things and some of the things we talked about. I've read everything I need to read, and I'm ready to make decisions regarding the requested jury instructions, as well as the verdict forms. So is that okay with everybody? And Mr. Runner, you're here by 8:15. Okay. We'll try to do that, and I'll try to get Mr. Kirkland down. Obviously, he needs to be here for that. Also, there was some question at some point regarding possible evidence related to if, in fact, Mr. Kirkland renders an unsworn statement. I have read everything I think I need to read on that. And if you want to argue that also, I can certainly address that tomorrow. Okay? Anything else then from anybody? You know what? I do. I was supposed to, well, I will get them to you. Judy upstairs has typed them yesterday. It just adds a couple new things. I've not changed the other stuff, but I will certainly make sure that Chris gets those to you very shortly. I can walk up and get them myself real quick. Please? Yes, Chris will be here all day. Okay, but I was supposed to get them yesterday. I didn't go up and get them, so I'll make sure they get down here very shortly. Okay. All right. Anything else?
I think relative to the issue on the unsworn statement, it might not be right for consideration yet.
Okay. All right.
So we may have some additional materials when it does become right.
Okay. I appreciate that. Okay. All right. Thank you all again very much. See you tomorrow.